Everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and we're getting ready to finish our final character in our Christmas in July 2023 project. And today we're going to be working on the final one, which is Pere Hiver from the Festive Friends series, which is by Sarah Peel of Cool Crafting. And you can get a kit for all of the materials you need to make all three characters and all of their clothes over on the Cool Crafting website, and I'll put a link up here for you. And if you know, we've already worked on Florin the elf, and we've got his name then, which is all lovely and finished. We've also then worked on Merry Angel as well, and she's all beautifully finished too. Sorry, the light's floating out with her lovely, oh sorry Merry, picked you up by your ears then. With a lovely wings and halo, and a beautiful fur trimmed coat, that dress that she's got. And now it's time for our final character. He's all naked at the moment, so he's ready for his clothes. So he's going to be as Santa Claus, which is in this red and white boucle outfit. And I'm really looking forward to making his coat, actually. The dungarees, you know, when I made Florin, if you wanted to make the other two characters' clothes already, then there's separate videos for you on my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be making the Santa. And the dungarees are basically the same as Florin's the elf. So I'm going to kind of speed sew through those. So if you want a bit more detail, then just pop over to have a look at the Florin video, and I'll take it a little bit more step by step there. And if you want to skip past the bit where I struggled with the instructions for how to make the straps and ended up doing it my own way, which was far easier, then please do that. You don't need to watch my tragedy at that point, but I just left it in because we all struggle sometimes with our sewing and sometimes following instructions, and that's why by following different people on things like YouTube or other designers and their blogs, you can actually pick up different techniques that then you can apply to some place where you're struggling and find your way through. And that's what I did with the straps on Florin's dungarees, or bloomers I think they're called. So we're going to use that same strap method on Pere Hiver for his bloomers, because he'll have straps going over his shoulders too. And then we'll then be working on this. He's got a trim and a tuck in his, a pleat in his, so we're going to be working on that. So this is just going to be the video for doing the bloomers for Pere Hiver. There'll be a separate video for doing his coat, and then I'll do a final video for doing his hat and his boots, and that way then you can just jump in on the bits that you want to do. And I hope that's all the way that you'd like to do it. Before we go any further as well with today's video, I just want to say a really big thank you to Anne Heldeos. Anne has sponsored the purchase of the kit for me for the Festive Friends so that I could bring this tutorial to you. And so I just want to say a really big thank you to Anne on behalf of both myself and anybody else who watches this video, both now and in the future, just to say a really big thank you, because we really appreciate your kindness and your generosity, and I appreciate your support in allowing me to bring these characters to you and these tutorials to you. And I hope you're enjoying stitching along, Anne, as well. So thank you very much indeed. So if you want to get your baggie, your bag with your traced pattern pieces. Pattern comes on big sheets like A4 sheets of paper or A3 sheets of paper that have been folded. So I always keep those intact. So at the very, very beginning, when we first started making the head and then the bodies for these characters, then I suggested that you traced off all of your pattern pieces for all of the outfits at the start. So that's already covered way back in one of the earlier videos, probably video 1, I think, actually, when we talked about preparation, how to get the best out of things. So pick up your baggie with your pattern pieces, and then we need our fabrics, and we've got this beautiful deep red boucle, and we've got this lovely oatmeal boucle as well, this off-white, this beigey creamy colour boucle, and together they look divine. So that's all good. And also for his bloomers, I've got this red fabric, which I think I'm going to stick with because I haven't always stuck with the fabrics in the kit, but I am with this one. I'm going to use that one for his, which is the one that came in the kit. So it's just got that metallic gold on that hopefully you can see, which looks lovely. And that will then go nicely with all of those three, and just a bit of a brighter red, which I think will look nice. And then we've also got some felt, which I think will be for his hat and boots, I believe. But we'll cover all of that as we go along. So if you want to find your pattern pieces, and if you want to sew along with me today, then I'm very happy to have you here. I'll tilt the camera down and we'll get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm doing is I've got my sparkly red fabric, metallic red fabric, and I'm just pressing it just to get out the creases, because we want these creases, because they're quite deep creases, they're quite fixed, aren't they? And if we use a bit of steam and our nice warm iron, then we will be able to get these creases out. It's easier to get them out before you start cutting and making out your garment than it is to try and iron them out afterwards. So I always do try to get these out as much as possible. Sometimes you can use a water spray bottle or use plenty of steam if you can as well, because steam will really help to lift that. When I start to iron on the other side, I will use a pressing cloth in order to cover up that metallic paint. It should be fine, but we just don't want any of that to go on the back of our, on the bottom of our iron. So I'll press it one side, then I'll turn it over and use my pressing cloth, and I like to use a silk organza pressing cloth. This is a scrap I've had left over from dressmaking, and it just creates that barrier between the fabric or anything, or interfacing. I use it for a lot with interfacing as well. In a delicate fabric, if I was sewing with wool, I would also use a press mat as well, not press mat, a press cloth, sorry, as well, because it just takes the heat, the harshness of the heat out of the iron, and just allows that fabric just to be pressed and just to go nice and flat. So I'm just going to carry on doing that, and then we'll be ready to talk about our pattern pieces and cutting out. Okay, the pattern pieces you're going to need for making Pere's bloomers are the actual pattern piece for the bloomers themselves. You're going to need the bib for the front, and you're also going to need the strap as well. And we're going to cut 2 out of each of these pieces. So this piece of fabric here can be folded in half. Just be careful, because you have got a selvage edge just on one edge, or I have on mine, perhaps you can see it better this way, and it's got this little bound edge and those little dots, so we want to avoid that when we are using this. So I think I've just turned my fabric round so that I've got my selvage edge across to the right hand side, and then I can fold my top fabric on top of it so that I can miss that selvage edge. Can you see I've just got one edge slightly proud of the other, like that. Okay. Make sure your edges are all lined up, and then we can then pop our fabric pieces on. So better just check that we've got everything straight. So give yourself a nice fold, and then you need your measuring tape, and then we're going to measure from the folded edge to the grain line, and it's just under the 17.4 centimetres. And what I tend to do is, using a ruler, is I extend my grain line up to the top, because then you can be more certain to have the grain straight when we're working with that. So just put the arrow on the bottom, just tell me what that is. So let's go back again. So 17.4 at the bottom and 17 on the top, so I can tell that these aren't straight at the moment. So let me take my piece off again. This bottom hem here isn't quite straight on the pattern. Let me just go up slightly so we can twist it. And then what I tend to do is put a pin, just taking a little bite of the fabric out at the bottom of the garment, pattern piece, and then measure again. So that's on 17, and that's on 17, so I've got it straight now. Okay, that's better. So now I can repin this one at the bottom now to take a bigger chunk, and I'll pin that on again when I've gone when you're not watching. So then let's do the same thing here. Let's put the strap next to this line, because when we cut one line we can cut the other if it's straight. Measure at the bottom again, and that's 5, and that's just under 5, so that needs to just come out slightly. So there we go, 5. Okay. So now we're straight, I'm going to put those on, and I'm going to do the same with my bib pattern. That'll probably just fit just nicely in there. And then we can then save this bit of fabric for another project another time. So that's how I'm going to lay mine out. Once I've laid it out, now I've got my pins in holding my grain lines correctly, then I'm then going to use my scissors and just cut this out, and I'll come back to you once we've done that. So the first thing we're going to do once we've got all our pattern pieces cut out is we're going to be working with the straps. So if you want to take your pins out of your straps and pop your pattern piece away, just so that you've got it nice and safe for future reference. Then you're going to separate out your 2 pieces of strap onto your ironing board. And we're not making these the same way as they're made in the instructions from Sarah, because I struggled with that the first time. So we're just going to go straight on and do the same way that I've done this time. So what you're going to do is you're going to fold your straps in half. And I've tested the fabric, and the ink isn't coming off, so I'm just going to give that a quick press this way. If it was a bigger piece, I'd use my press cloth, but these can be a little bit fiddly. So you're going to fold those in half, both of them in half that way. That gives you a crease down the middle. Now you're going to fold each long raw edge into the middle of that crease and just press it. So once you've got your first one, that gives you your line to then butt it up against the other one. Okay, give those a good press. Blow on it when it's hot, just to cool it off. And then you're going to, so it's like that at the moment with the two raw edges folded in. And now we're going to just fold them over on top of each other so that they're nice and neat. The neater they are in being folded over on top of each other, the better. And just give that time just to heat set. And then we're going to do the other, and then we're going to take them to the sewing machine. Now on florins, I did fold in the edge here, and then I took out some of the bulk so that when I sewed it together, we'd got the a nice clean edge. However, it's such a small edge, and it's going to go inside the dungarees and hide behind the bib and hide in the waistband. So you're not actually going to see any of the raw edges. So I don't think we need to go to that trouble. You could just put a little bit of fray check on the end if you wanted to, if you've got any of that liquid, or you can just do a little zigzag stitch over the edge if you wanted to, just to hold those fibres in and just trim off any loose ones. But I think that's all that's necessary really, because he's going to have his big coat over the top, and as I say, the straps slot inside the dungarees so you don't really see them. So let's get it to that point there, and then we'll be ready then to sew and get the sewing machine out. So I've chosen a red thread from my stash. You don't get your red or green thread with your kit. You have to choose those yourself. I've just chosen a scarlet that just seemed to match this quite well. And all I'm going to do is put these into my sewing machine and using a stitch length of 3. Stitch length of 3 because we're top stitching, and I'm going to move my needle across to my left so that I'm just on the edge. So when I can't get my words right this morning, sorry. When I feed the straps through, I can just keep my finger to the edge, well, I'll show you on the edge of the presser foot, and then we can just keep that really nice and tight. So let me move that across a little bit. So I'm using a position of 1, and that should give me a nice bit. And you've just got to be aware that sometimes on these smaller pieces, your machine might pull the end of your strap down inside the machine bed. So just take your time. Have your hands on your threads anyway, if you've got a machine that doesn't cut them off, because that way then, if you need to, you can just put a little bit of pressure, not pulling, but a little bit of pressure on the threads, and it should then just help that strap come through. So let's just see how we get on. Just nice and steady. Yeah, mine's fine, it's just gone straight through. And the other thing we can do is something called chain stitching. You can put pins on these if you want to. Just make sure that they're on top of each other. You want them to be as nice and neat as possible. And then the other thing that we can do is put our needle in our work just to hold it, is we can chain piece. So whereas that one's coming through, we can put the other one straight up to it and then run straight on to the next one. Try and keep to the edge. Okay, needle up out of the work. Let's take our threads off. And you can leave long tails on these and then thread them back through again, but as we've learnt with florin, you don't really see the straps at all. They're just there to hold the back of the bloomers up. So I'm not going to be as precious about these ones, but if you want to know how I neaten the edges and how I tucked the threads back in again, then watch the video on Florin's bloomers, because I go through all of that in detail. Okay, so that's that bit done. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to get our bib ready. I know we're going a bit out of order with the way that Sarah has done her instructions, but let's get these 2 bits ready so they're ready to go when we are. So we're going to take our 2 pieces of bib, and I'm just going to turn them so that they are the right sides together. So we've got the metallic stars in together. And then I'm going to pin them in the corners. Now, the bib is generally, the last one wasn't a square. Let me just get my tape measure. Let's have a little look, see if it's a square or not on this one. Use centimetres, it'll be easier to see. So that's 5.5 centimetres, and that's 5 centimetres. So you want to leave one 5.5 centimetre edge open, because that's where we're going to turn it through. So we're going to go through around 3 sides. So that's a 5.5 centimetre edge, that's a 5 centimetre edge. So I'm going to start here And so all the way down I'm going to pivot and turn, down, pivot and turn and down, and then finish. And I'm going to leave this section here open so that we can turn it round the right way round. So to do this I'm going to move my needle the other way. So get used to doing that and to moving your needle across to position number 7. And then we can sew this with our 1/4 inch seam allowance. So a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then my needle in the work just to hold it. Hopefully you can see. And then, at least it's not white fabric, is it, this time? At least you can see. Mary's was a bit difficult to see. So when you get close, needle in the work, and then you can take your pins out. Lift your press the foot up if you need to, just to release the pressure on that. And then up into the corner. When we get close, and I'm going to just leave my needle in the work, lift my presser foot, and I can spin my fabric. And if the edge of my presser foot is on the edge of my fabric, then I know that I've got the same seam allowance all the way round. So let's just go around here. And before, we have also just gone sideways across the corner. I forgot to do that on this one, but that's another option that you can do if you want to. Let's see if we've got, now I need to do one more stitch. And then that's perfect, right, and then down this side here, and we'll just reverse again at the edge. Okay, needle out of the work. Oops, thread doesn't want, oh, it's got tangled around my needle, look. I'll just cut those threads off, I'll sort that out in a second. Okay. So what we can do then, as I stitched all the way around, hopefully you can see that with the light. I'm just going to take off the corners first, and then I just go back in and just take off a smidge more. So we're not going straight, not doing a straight 45-degree angle across the corner. I'm taking over just a little bit more than that. So take the corner off first, and then just take a little bit more on both sides, and it just takes those bits off for you. Because the next thing that we can do, just move that out of the way. Bring our iron back in again. We're just going to open up this seam allowance because that just helps us when we're turning this through. So I'm just separating my seam allowance apart from each other, and I'm just going to run my iron through in that little gap just there, and then on this side as well, and then on this side as well. And I'll show you how those corners then make sure that you don't get too much bulk in them, so they'll lie nice and flat. So that's how it looks when you've got them all, when you've trimmed your corners. Can you see how the edges aren't quite mating up, and they're certainly not overlapping, and that just makes sure that you've not got any bulk in there. And then we can turn that side we've just pressed down and just fold the other sides back as best as you can. It's a bit difficult with these little pieces, so don't go scalding your fingers with the steam. It does just help turn it when it comes to turning it. Okay. Give it a little blow just so it's easy to manage, and then we're just going to put our fingers in and just turn this round the right way round. Then I use my seam gauge normally, or you can use a quick unpick, and it's got an edge on it like that, little corner, so that's my seam gauge, and I can just use that to then just sort those corners out so that they're nice and crisp. You just need a little bit of coaxing into the right direction. You can use the point on the seam gauge, which is just here, but just be careful when you do that, you do it gently, because you don't want to be putting a hole through your fabric. You're just trying to just push that corner so that it's completely out and nice and nicely shaped for you. And we'll do this one. And you can also, just get my glasses, just make sure we've got perfect corners. You can also use a pin and just tease that little bit of fabric out of the corner. It wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. That's better. And this one too. So once we've got that all settled, I'm going to pop this back down on our press mat, and look how those edges are quite nice and flat already. Just make sure that the other one's pressing out as well, and then we can use our press cloth, a double tip, here it is, over the top, so I don't want to spoil this now, and then just give it a bit of a steam over that edge. just hold it flat. Give it a blow. Yep, that's lovely, isn't it? Okay, so now we're going to take it to the machine again, and I'm just going to zigzag over the bottom edge of here just to neaten it off. If you've got an overlocker, you can overlock it. Whether it's worth getting your overlocker out for this small piece, that's up to you. So I'm going to go onto a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to go down to a stitch width of 2.5 and a stitch length of 2, and I found that works quite nicely for these little garments. And then just make sure that you zig in your fabric and just zig off the edge, zig and zag off the edge, and then that will just neaten that up for you. And if you wanted to do your straps while you're here, then absolutely you can just do the end of your straps too. I'm not going to do mine for the reasons I've already stated, but you can do yours if you want to. So just neaten off that edge, and there's the little bib ready. So we've got straps ready and we've got our bib ready. So now let's have a look at our main garment, because we hadn't got any notches on any of these, but now we have got some notches, so let's mark those. So I'm going to use my snips, and we've got 2 on the back here, which is where Pere's little tail pokes out. So let's just notch those, and I'm literally just putting a couple of millimetres in the cut in the fabric, if you can see that, it's just tiny. And then we've got 2 here to indicate where the pleat is in his trousers, because he's got a decorative pleat and some trim in his trousers, just elevating them slightly. And that's all we've got. So now we can take the pattern piece off. If you want to, you can thread trace this pleat as well, but I think when you put these notches together, it's going to give you a pleat anyway, so I don't think we need to do that, but feel free to do that. So let's put our pattern pieces away. We're finished with our pattern pieces now, and then I'm going to use our press mat again, and using one piece at a time, I'm going to locate where the notches are on the side of our garment, and I'm going to put those on top of each other, absolutely directly on top of each other, and then I'm going to put a pin in at right angle to the side seam, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. So we're not looking for the notches at the top here for his tail, we're looking for the ones in the leg, in this long section down here of the leg. So not the ones, not a notch on a scoop, you're looking at the notches on the leg. And then another pin in the other side. And then if you lay that down on your wool mat, pressing mat, you'll then be able to cover it over with your press cloth, and you can use a tea towel or a handkerchief, not paper handkerchief, obviously a fabric handkerchief, or you can use a bit of scrap fabric if you've got it. And that's going to give you then a nice pleat, which we're going to just hold there. 5/8 of an inch, that is, or 1.5 centimetres. So if you've got a chalk pencil, and I've got one here, and you've got a ruler, we can just take those pins out for a second, because we've got a nice firm crease on that line, haven't we? Which is just like that. And then if we match up where those, do it that way, match up where the thing is, and I want you to do the chalk mark towards the hem, because when we open this out, that chalk mark, and when that pleat has been folded in, will be folded down over where you've marked. So I don't want you to mark on the top, because then you'll have a line that you have to then take out. So we said it was 4/8 of an inch, didn't we? No, we didn't. We said it was 5/8 of an inch. So put your ruler on the edge, on the very folded edge, and then that will give you just a line you can just draw in. I've got this little chalk pencil that works quite nicely and is quite precise. So that's just giving me a line now that I can follow, if you can see that. Hopefully it's just along there. It is pink, so it's just a little difficult to see on the red. So I'm just going to pin my fabric together just so it doesn't shift while I'm working down that line, like that. You can see that, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and do a straight stitch all the way down there, and that will then have that set. And I'm going to do the same with the other one as well. So I'll go off and do the other one now, and then we'll be all ready then to stitch these together, won't we? So I've got both of mine now all pinned and ready to go. So I'm going to go back to my sewing machine, and now because we've got a line to follow, we don't need to move our needle, but I am going to I've taken my stitch back down to a 2.2 construction stitch because we're just going to stitch over this, and we're going to reverse at the start and stop. So I'm just going to do a couple of stitches in and then reverse, and then put my needle into the work so it's just held down, and I can take that first pin out because we've got that held together now. So I'm just going to follow the drawn line, just putting that in the middle of the presser foot, turn my speed up a little bit. When I stop to take my pins out so that I don't cause a jig in the line. And then we can just sew straight onto the next one as well. So once that one's done, get your next one lined up. We can chain stitch, can't we? So line the drawn line up, go on. Just remember to reverse where we were reversing, and then pin out again. Keep your straight line as straight as possible. And then just reverse at the end again. Needle out, separate these pieces of fabric. Take off our starting threads. Okay. So a little bit backwards and forwards to the iron with this set because we've got these pleats to be managing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set our stitches. So we just iron over, just press over the seam that we've just stitched. That just sets our stitches for us and just make sure they're nicely in the fabric. And then the next thing we're going to do then is we're going to open this out, but we're going to press that seam, the pleat, down towards the bottom hem. So again, let's just put that and just put a little bit of pressure on the bottom hem, and it should just all sit nicely for you. If I show you that, that's how it looks when it's just been pressed and you've got your little flap just there, which is exactly how it should be. Let's do the other one. And you can keep it just that way, I suppose, can't you? And then just press on it. So you can press from the wrong side or the right side, whichever you prefer. Just make sure that you're pressing your pleat down towards your hem. You don't want one up and one down. So we've got two there with the pleats going down. So the next thing you're going to need is then your ribbon trim, and it's the side with the dots on that you're going to use. And this ribbon trim is now going to run across the top here, and it's just going to hide those stitches. So I'm going to leave my ribbon intact because obviously we can snip that off at the end, and I'm going to chain stitch this again as I have done before. So let me just put a little pin to hold that at the start. And again, let's put it at right angles to the stitch line so we can get closer to it before we need to take it out. And on the ribbon, if I can just show you, we're aiming to stitch in this dark red section rather than go in the middle. I'm going to try and go right on the edge of this dark red section here on the borders, if you like, of that other bit. And that should then hide our stitches to a certain extent, I think. So let's just pin this on as best as we can, just to give us a good indication of where we're going with it. So I'm just trying to cover up the stitching line that we did before, and that will make sure that it all lines up properly. There we go. And then I'm just going to pop the other one straight underneath, and that can go straight onto this one as well. You can do them separately if you like, but that's going to give you the maximum amount of ribbon finish on the end, isn't it? If you can sew it without a gap in it. Oops. Hold it in place. Just try not to move your ribbon as you're pinning it, because it has a tendency just to shift slightly, and just make sure you're just covering over your stitches for your pleat. That's it. And then on towards the end, and then we should be about ready. Okay, make sure I have pinned it to my pressing mat. There we go. Okay, so that's just one long continuous piece. Let's move this out of the way on our press cloth. Turn the machine back in again. And I'm going to do this top edge first. So I'm doing the edge away from the pleat first. And I am going to move my needle across so that I'm probably at 0.7, or 7 is the minimum. And I want to be right on that edge. So I'm going to pop on my glasses so that I can see this really precisely. Apologies if my head gets in the way, but trying to get a nice result as well for mine. And I'm just going to do a stitch backwards and forwards, and then needle in the work, and I'm going to take that first pin out. Now the other thing that I've not done but I can do now is I'm just going to change my stitch length up to a 3 as well, because we're top stitching. So I've taken it off the 2.0, and now just go really nice and steady, because you don't want to go off the edge of your ribbon. Take your pins out as you get there, and if you need to slow your speed down, then just use a button if you've got it, just to slow your speed down. Don't sew over your pins if you can help it, because you can mess up your machine. Getting towards the end here, take that pin out, and just making sure these are just going to follow on nicely to each other. So take that first pin out. Still just trying to keep on that edge if we can, just to hide those stitches. Just hold on to the end so it doesn't twist off your stitches, your other stitches. And then if needle in the work, let's just do a couple of stitches down this edge through the ribbon. Maybe one more. Yes, just pull the ribbon. Okay, so let's turn it round, and then let's go back down the other side again. Just staying again as we did on that red edge. So see how my one piece is folded underneath as well on here, so I need to fold that out so it's matching up with my other one. Starting and ending threads are both in the same place, that makes it easy. And now I'm going to snip through the ribbon at that point just there, and I'm going to snip through the ribbon just here and take that off. So we've got quite a nice little bit left. It might go on his hat maybe, I don't know, like we did with Florin, so we'll keep that to one side. But then we've got our pieces of leg here with our pleat under here, which is how we're supposed to have it. And then we've got our lovely bit of ribbon trim on the top. Let me have a quick look and see what Sarah wants us to do next. I think it's going to be the bottom of the legs, and see how that goes. Yeah, we're on to the bottom of the leg. So what I think I'm going to do now is I'm going to take mine to the machine, and I'm going to zigzag all the way around these pieces now, because this will have a zigzagged edge and this will all need to be zigzagged at some stage. So I might as well do it now while they're in the flat. So that's what I'm going to do next. So let's put our stitch back onto a zigzag, and I put it onto a 2.5 depth, the zig and the zag bit, and it's on a 2 width stitch difference. So then we're going to start at the top here, and let's just zigzag over these bits. Of course you can also overlock if you wish to, or if your machine doesn't do a zigzag, then you can also use your pinking shears just to edge this. But if you're using pinking shears, you do have to be careful that you're not going to then take off any of your seam allowance, because that will lose some of your bearings for you as to where you need to be. So let's zigzag it down this leg here, and that will hold that pleat down as well. And again over the hem just here as well. One thing I thought about, before you zigzag on part of the curve for the crotch seam, locate where your notches are and just put a pencil mark on the inside of your garment, just where each of those are. So on here I've got one just there, so I'm putting a pencil mark just there, and another one there, because once you've zigzagged you won't be able to see your little snips, but if you've got these marks here on the inside, then you'll be able to use those as reference then to know where you've got to leave the gap for the tail when you come to sew them together. So what we need to do now is turn up the hems of these bloomers, and we're going to turn that up by 1 centimetre. So if you get your pressing mat again, and then this is where having a pressing mat, or if you've got a cloth cover on your ironing board, it can help, because what we can do is we can use the pins into the board just to hold it steady for us. So let's turn that up by 1 centimetre. It's a really narrow hem, so you're not losing much length at all. And then when you're ready, just pop a pin in, and that will just hold that in place for you on your either your pressing mat or on your ironing board. Slightly less. And again just here. You can make your hem slightly bigger if you want to, but all you're going to do is lose some of the length on the trousers for Pere, and I think his are slightly longer than Florin's were. And then with the pins in place, you can just quite easily then just hold that with your fingers out of the way and just press that edge. Give it a little blow so that that all holds in place, and this cotton cotton fabric always does hold in place beautifully. And then we're going to just repeat that with the other one whilst we're here. Just put a pin in. I do seem to be whistling through this one a lot quicker than I did Florin's, so that's good. It just shows you how much more confident you feel once you've made something, and you might find that too once you've made these. Okay, press that edge. That's going to hold that down for us. So then pins can come out. Give it a blow. And those are ready now to sew. So we're going to sew these quite close to the top of the zigzag, because we want to just give ourselves as much room for the elastic as possible. So let's take it off our zigzag for now, back down to a straight stitch. And then I'm going to use, yeah, that's perfect. So I've got my needle in the middle, but I'm using the left edge of my sewing machine just to keep that in place. I'm just going to just reverse at the start. We're back down to a 2.2 construction stitch, even though this is a little bit of top stitching really. You can use 2.2 or 3. Just try and keep your hem nice and even. And then pop this one through as well the same way. Okay. Let's take the start and stop threads off. And there we've got two beautifully sewn hems. We've got our lovely pleat that's sitting there just nicely, and our lovely ribbon on top. So the next thing that we need is the little, I forgot to get that out of my bag. We need the safety pin that was included in the kit. And you're going to use your thin elastic is the one that you want, and I keep it all together again. And we're just going to feed the pin onto the elastic, and I put it through twice normally, so like that, and then I close that up. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take the head of the pin and we're going to thread it through inside the hem that we've just sewn. That's why it needs to be big enough to take the pin through. So if you're struggling with yours, you might have to get the pin through, you might have made two smaller hem on yours. So you can either go and unpick it, or you just have to find a smaller safety pin. So at the moment we've got a nice long end of it, longer than our piece, so I'm not going to worry. But when we do the next one, I'll show you what we need to do. So we're going to take that safety pin off, and I'm going to just pull my elastic back just gently, just so that I've got a little bit just out of the edge. And then I'm just going to put a pin through it just to hold it. Because the first thing we're going to do, and I'll hold it further down the hem, Because first thing I'm going to do is just do a few stitches over, and we're going to take the stitch length down to a 1, so really tiny stitch, and we're just going to do a couple of stitches in the seam allowance and just go backwards and forwards over the edge of that elastic. I've just gone backwards and forwards 3 or 4 times. I'm going to leave the elastic out so then I can see it and I know it's there, so that's how that's looking. See the little bit of elastic just sticking out the end. Because then what we need to do is, using your seam gauge, we can set that at 9 centimetres on here. Because now what you're going to do is gather up, pull on the elastic and gather your fabric up until this measures 9 centimetres. So I'm a bit long at the moment. And this is why you needed to fix that elastic down so that you can pull on it without it coming through. A little bit more. It's about right. So then, without letting go of your elastic, because obviously it'll try and concertina back up inside your hem, put your pin in and make sure that you catch the elastic whilst you're doing so. So that's going to hold that hem in place. And you can see how that pleat now does get some shape there, doesn't it? So what we're going to do now is, in fact, I think what I ought to do is probably pin that a little bit closer to the hem edge, just so it can't come out. And then I'm going to pop that into my machine, and we're going to just sew over the edge again like we did for the other side. So just a few stitches backwards and forwards in the seam allowance, and that will just hold that elastic in place. We can then take the pin out, and then I can snip that elastic off with confidence, knowing that we've got it in place. So then what we're going to do, I'm going to repeat the same for the other one, because then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to pop these 2 side seams together. We're going to match up our ribbon and our hems and our crotch seam. We're going to put some pins in, so I'm putting one in above the ribbon, I'm putting one in down towards the hem. And you might need to just pull your gathers towards the folded edge of your trousers just to keep that together. So this is right sides together, and then one at the crotch seam just there. Crotch seam, inside leg seam we're doing, aren't we? So it's just at the crotch point there as well. Take my stitch length back up to 2.2, and we're going to sew along here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance just to encase that and to make the leg of the trousers for us. Doesn't matter which side you start first, but you do need to reverse stitch on here. Needle in your work, and take your first pin out. Make sure your raw edges are together. And reverse at the end as well. And what we wanted to do is, when we were pinning it, is we want to make sure that we've got those edges of the ribbon together. Let's have a look and see how I did. Let's turn this round the right way round. Oh, there we go, look, that'll do nicely, won't it? The edges of the pleat are matched together, just there. The hem's matched, and then the ribbon has matched as well perfectly, so I'm happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to do the other one, the other leg. I'm going to put my elastic into that one, and then I'll come back to you when you've done the same. Okay, so we've got our 2 legs now. The first one I've turned so that the right side of the fabric is out so that you can see what's happening. The other one I've left inside out, and that's the way you need one inside out and one the right way round, because now what we're going to do is put the one that's the right side out inside the one that is the wrong way round, and that will just give us both sides together, right sides together. And then we're going to match it at this crotch seam here. Just push one seam allowance one way and have one the other way, and then you'll be able to get that crotch point to match just perfectly, and pop a pin in to hold that together for you. And I'll have the pin heads pointing out into the crotch curves, so that'll make it easier then to tie it all together later and to take those pins out, and we can choose then later which side we pin from. So I've put the waist seam together on one side, so if I open that way you can see the two right sides together, and the 2 legs are inside each other. Let's go to the other side and do the other waist seam so that that's all matching, because those are our match points. The two waist seams and the crotch point are our match points. And then we've got our, where our notches are, we've got our little chalk marks. So let's put a red pin in there to tell us to stop stitching. So I'll change that one, use that one for down here. And then on the other chalk mark, let's put a red pin again. So that's what I call my red pin trick. So that just reminds me that we've got to stop stitching there. And then let's come over to this side and then let's just put one pin and not a red pin in that way around there. Okay, so that's what it looks like when you've got it all together from here. And now we're going to join, let's have a think which way. We'll start from this side. We're going to sew down to the red pin where the chalk mark is and reverse stitch. And then we're going to come back down to this one and reverse stitch and then carry on all the way round. We're on a number 2 construction stitch, and I'm going to move my needle across so that I can use the edge of my presser foot to be able to stitch. 1/4 inch, okay. So take that pin out first because I'm right on top of it. I'm going to take a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then I'm going to put my needle in my work just to hold it. So we're almost straight onto the red pin first to start off with. So let's take that pin out and just know that we've got a little way forward to go. And then I reverse, then needle out, then I'm going to jump ahead to my next point. And with this you've got you're trying to sew inside this tunnel, if you like. So you do have to just be a little bit kind of familiar with what we're going to be doing, and you'll see as we sort of start to sew this how we move this round. So while we're here, let me take that pin out first, and if you notice I haven't cut my threads over that gap because we don't need to, because we can snip those afterwards. So I'm going to keep the other pins out of the way, a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work because we need to be able to pivot. So then we're going to lift up the presser foot because we're on this curve here. So long as we can move the fabric so that when we put the presser foot down, we've got about an inch clear in front of us, in front of just in here of the presser foot. We can then sew that inch. Ooh, watch out for that pin. Push that pin back in a little bit more. It's getting in the way. Right, okay. And then we can then do a few more stitches and then stop with the needle in the work, lift up your presser foot, and now we can roll these trousers towards us. So we're getting down towards the crotch. So I can fold the sort of waist seam out of the way now. Then we're going to sew down towards this crotch point. Take the pin out when you get there. And just make sure you've got everything all nice and flat. Just run your finger along and you can feel how clear it is, how safe you are to be able to start stitching. And then we're going to start to move this now. So I've just sewn round a bit of the curve, but then I'm just going to just lift up my presser foot slightly and just move that round. We've not got to stop on this seam at all, so we can just carry on straight now, round and up to the top. Let's take that seam out. Right, okay. Take a start and stop threads off, they've got caught in there. And then we're also going to just snip through the threads that just jumped over that gap that we left. So if I now turn these out this way, so let's turn them right way round, both of them, they've got our two little legs, and then we've got a little hole in the back there for the tail to go through, and I'll just show you how I finish that off. And then we've got our two gathered legs with the pleats, the big pleat, and then the ribbon going round, and the ribbon's a nice and even look as well across the front. So that's all good. So let's just go now to our back seam. So you're going to just hold the seam up. So this is where the gap is that we're going to try and neaten now. So then we can then open that up. So the seam allowances are pressed flat, just flat against each other. And I'm going to go, let me just use my quick and pick to show you. I'm going to do a couple of stitches across at the top of the gap. and I'm going to sew down one side, a couple of stitches across the bottom and then up the other side, and it just neatens that edge and just keeps that seam allowance from poking out towards the front. So you're working inside the garment, so it can be a little bit tricky. That seam allowance should just fold back, and if you need to, you can just use your chalk marks that you made before just to remind you whereabouts to stop. So let me just go this bit. And then we go down. Needle in the work. Let's pivot across to the bottom. Make sure we've not got any puckers. Ooh. Just catching my sit, and then pivot again, and we're back up the other side. And then we can then just go across the back seam, just make sure you've gone across the top. That's the work. And I'll show you what it looks like when I've got the starting threads off. So we've just neatened that back edge up just so that where the hole is, you can see the stitching down across and then back up again just around there. Okay, so that's the back edge. So we now know which is the back. Now, if you remember from when we did florins, I had a real problem getting my elastic through, didn't I? Can you remember? So what we're going to do at this stage now is we're just going to sew down just a couple of centimetres just to hold this seam allowance flat. So you know we pushed it open for reinforcing that back seam there, just sewing round it, neatening it. We're just going to go a couple of centimetres down. I mean, if you wanted to, you could sew all the way down across the bottom and up again if you wanted. But we're just going to do this on front and back, just so it holds that seam allowance back and doesn't cause a problem when we're trying to get the elastic through. And because the thread is such a good match, and you want as little lip on your seam allowance as possible, because you don't want the pin. Can you remember when I don't know if you watched it or not? Did I put the pin back in here? Yes. So if you remember that when we have to fold this over at the waist like that, we then have to thread the elastic through with the pin. And what happened last time was that I didn't sew my seam allowances down. So when I was trying to thread my pin through, pretend this is folded over, then my pin kept getting stuck in behind the seam allowance, and because this had been folded down quite carefully, it was giving it a blind end and it wouldn't go through. So by sewing down the two edges of that seam allowance, there's nothing for that pin to get caught into behind, and it'll just travel through that waist much easier. And that was one of the tips that I sort of put on the screen for you to go back to, which was something that I'd learnt as I was making them. So we need to do that on front and back. So I'm just going to go onto my front now, open that seam allowance up and do the same thing. So I'm just going to sew down the front down here. And just guesstimate it. It's about 2 centimetres you want to go down in total, but you can measure it and mark it if you want to. Then go across, and then we're going to go back up again. And you just hold, as I say, just holding that seam allowance down, so that when we then come to thread that elastic through, we should have no problems. And if you remember, I ended up having to open up my waistband so that I could get through. And it's such a small amount of stitching that if I just show you on the front there, you see just down here, you won't even notice that once that's all been folded over and it's all nice and got the bib on it. It just looks like a bit of top stitching, doesn't it? So the next thing we're going to do then is we're going to press this first to give us a line to work to. So the first thing we're going to do is take our seam gauge and measure. So what we'll do, I'll show you a quick tip that I do. So if I've got something like this, it's a bit fiddly, if I just hold it open, so I've not got anything folded over at the moment, put my hand inside, and I'm now going to put a row of pins at the 1 centimetre mark going horizontally across. So just periodically just pop these across. I'll use white pins and then you'll be able to see, like this. because this is much easier than trying to fold it over and measure it all the time. So I'm holding my gauge up against my piece of fabric, taking a pin, and then where the 1 centimetre mark is, you could put a chalk mark too if you wanted to. I just don't like to have too many chalk marks because you have to then go back afterwards, don't you, and rub them off. So if I can use a pin just to mark it, then I will do. Right, so we've got that line now. So now I know if I fold that over so that the pin is on the very top edge of the folded edge, I know then that I've got 1 centimetre that I have then folded over. So again, I can go all the way around now and just fold this down. I'm actually finger pressing it. Probably just needs a quick press because we do need to use this line for a reference for attaching our braces and attaching our braces and attaching our bib. So take that to the ironing board and just press it. You can press it with the pins in place if you've got glass head pins. If not, just remove your pin while you're pressing it. And then once you've done that, you'll have a folded edge that you can then refer to as being your waistband, and that's what we need. So let me just go and press mine down quickly, and I will come back to show you what we're going to do next. Because we attach the straps and the bib before we sew down the waist seam, because I think it then gives it a neater finish. So that's why we're going to do that. So back in a second. Okay, so we're going to work with our bib first, and I want you to fold that in half and then just put a pin down that folded edge. So you're folding the zigzagged side, not the finished off side. There's my zigzag side just there, and there's my pin mark in half. Then find where your hole is for your back tail, because we need to identify which is the front. The front is the one without the hole. And then you're going to open out the hem that we've just pressed over. So we've got a nice mark there showing us where that hemline is. And now with the bib facing down towards the legs of the trousers, you're going to match that pin up with your centre front seam. And then you're going to move the pin so it's just holding it in place. And we've sewn that onto the, I've matched it up so that the centre of the seam allows, so the centre of the seam allows that seam is the centre of the bib, and then you can then put another pin either side if you wish to, just to hold that in place so that it stays still. Now what we're going to do is we are going to stitch just a hair's breadth below, so up towards the waistband, the folded edge of that seam line, because when we flick this over, we want it to look nice and neat and not have that stitching, and then when we go around the waist there'll just be one row of stitching around the waist. So that's what I've done. So hopefully you can see that. That's my bib pointing down towards the legs and the ribbon, and the waist edge of the zigzagged edge of the waistband is matching the zigzagged edge of the bib, so they're equal. And then I'm just going to stitch just a hair's breadth less than 1 centimetre, so that when we flick that back up like that, that bib will then stay upright like that. Okay, hope that all makes sense. So just turn your trousers inside out just for this section, because it'll be easier to sew from the inside. So line up your seam allowance with the edge of the, I'm going to have to just move my needle across, moved over to position number 5, and then I'm just going to now take a couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back, and needle in my work, pin out, and then just stitch across this edge, taking the pins out as I go. And then I'm just going to reverse stitch at the other side. And then, as I showed you, when you fold that up, look, you've got just a little bit of a fold bin there, but that's fine, that's going to hit nicely. So probably it could have been a little bit closer if I wanted to be, so I didn't get this little tuck inside there. And I could go over it again. Shall I go over it again? Let's go over it again, and it's just going to hold it. You're not going to see it from the outside. So just make sure you've not got anything folding under that you don't want folding under. Okay, So the bottom of the bib will get sewn down when we go round and sew the hem, so I'm going to leave that. So now if we put our front seam allowance, just tuck your bib in just for a second and match up the front and back seam allowances so that they're even. And then where you've got your edge of your bib, you're going to tuck one end of your strap down into your trouser leg, so you've got the long bit, and lay it up against the edge of the bib and just put a pin in just to hold that in place, because this is going to be the positioning of the strap. So the straps are in line with the outside edge of the bib. So again, this one, let me just get this lined up. So there's our seam allowances together. Poke your strap inside and just run it down the side of the bib so that you can see that straight. And you want the raw edges of your strap and the raw edge of your waist together. And again, we just pin it in there just to hold that for us whilst we just go and sew it. So now we can hold that open, and the straps are pointing down inside. So there's the straps, look, and there's the bib. So the straps and the bib are about in the same place when you've got the seam allowances matched. Okay. Hopefully you can see that okay. And now I'm just going to, the 1 centimetre seam allowance mark again, I'm just going to sew through the ends of the straps and just reverse on those just to hold those nice and steady for us. So once you've got your presser foot on it holding it still, you can just go forwards and backwards just to hold that in place. That's that one. And again, you can neaten off those ends if you want to. Let's get onto the second strap. Wait until it's underneath the presser foot and everything's all nicely lined up together. Then take your pin out to make sure your strap's twisted slightly. That's better. Okay. And I'm just going one way and backwards. And then we can take the starting and ending threads off. So now when we turn this round the right way round, get our legs out, you can see that the straps are pointing downwards, but they're attached, and the bib is pointing downwards on the right side together and out, so that when we then fold this waistband over, the straps and the bib all flick up to be the right way round. Can you see? So then all that we need to do now is go back, and I'm going to leave it open on the back seam allowance so that I can neaten that off in a second, because you won't see that then behind. So with the pressed mark has made a nice press mark for me. You can pin this if you want to, but you want to move your needle across so that you've got a nice 1 centimetre seam allowance, so that you're not going to be too narrow on that waistband. Just need a gap for the pin to go through, and then reverse stitch just at the bottom there, and you're going through the bottom of the straps, needling your work just while you change direction, and just make sure this is all folded over nicely. And you're going to go through the bottom of the bib as well. So you're just putting that, just sewing that 1 centimetre waistband down. Just remember to leave your gap when you're getting towards the end again, because you'll forget. Well, I might forget, you might not. So I'm going to go just over the other side of the strap, reverse and stop. Okay, needle out of the work. Okay, so we've got just one row stitching around the front, holding the bib on, because the other row is hidden, and the same with the straps, they're all just attached down in the bottom there. So now what we can do is take our piece of elastic. Now we need a thick elastic this time. We'll take our pin, and if you keep your fingers crossed for me, this should hopefully all fit through nicely. So we're just going to put the pin in and out through the elastic. And then we're going to feed it in to that seam edge, and then we're going to push on the pin with one hand and bunch the fabric up over the pin with the other, and then just like we did with the legs, and then you can just take little pulls and it should go all the way through. Right, we're coming up to the moment of truth. Will it go through, will it not? Hopefully. It's just a bit stiff, but yes, it's gone through. Perfect, that works. Okay. So keep pushing on your pin because it's just thick where the bib is. But it will go through, so just keep pushing on your pin. You're going to get round to where your strap is again, the other side of your strap. And then you can pull on your elastic. You've got that through. And then you can even your gathers up for your fabric. Now I wonder if I should have measured the elastic before I started putting it through. Oh yes, I should have done 16 centimetres. That was silly of me, wasn't it? But we can try them on Pere Hiver and make sure that they're all right for him. Let's have a look and see, shall we? Let's put his little legs in. You could, I'll put a note on the screen to remind you to mark your elastic at 16 centimetres before you get too far. See, I improve on some things, then I forget others. So let's get these onto Pere. Oh, looking very dapper. There's a little hole for his tail, look, to go through. So that's important for making sure you've got the stitch in the right place. There's the elastic there. So if I pull on the long end until I'm happy that that's sort of like the right kind of thickness. So let's just put a pin in there just to mark that, because that's where I'll sort it out when we've got it off him. So I've just put a pin through to mark it. So if you go too far, then you can do the same with yours. Let's hook it off his tail and take his bloomers off for him. There you go, Pere, you sit there, it's nearly ready. So now what I want to do is make sure there's no twists in the elastic and you can just feel your fingers along. And then I'm going to pull that side out. Pin's just pulled back through again, but because I hadn't taken it off, it's okay. And then I'm going to put those two pieces of elastic together. Take my safety pin off without letting go. That's it. Just loosen that out, and then I can put a pin in here just for the moment. Now you'll see I'm putting the two ends together like that, but I don't tend to sew them like that. I'll show you in a second. Let me just get a hand sewing needle together. I'll sew it with red thread and then you'll be able to see. There we go. Now what I want you to do is pull on the rows of the elastic so that it's really bunched up in the clothes, because I'm going to snip off the surplus that we don't need. I'll save that for another day, and then I can take my pin out and making sure that I don't let go of the two ends. I'm going to fold one over the other one, making sure I've not got any crosses in the, you know, twists in the elastic, and then I'm just going to take some over stitches along this edge just here. Sorry, I'm possibly keep going off camera, sorry, I should keep looking. I'll try and edit it so that you can make sure you can always see. So I just over stitch along this edge here, just over where the elastic is overlapped, and then I do a couple of stitches through the middle of the actual elastic itself, going through both sides, and then I just do some more stitches just holding this together. And I find that this is slightly less bulky, because if you stitch them with the let me show you this bit, if you stitch them with the both ends up like that, you get a really big bulk in the elastic, and when you try to get that through, you've got too much. Whereas if you overlap the ends like that, can't see very well with black elastic, can you? But if you overlap the ends like that, flat and in the round, then it usually lies much flatter for you. So let me do a few more little stitches, just holding that together, and I'll show you. It doesn't have to, this isn't neat and tidy, and it doesn't have to be, because it'll never ever be seen. What is the matter with me today? I'm throwing everything everywhere. Let's put the needle away. And now you can just pull on the edges of the elastic, of the bloomers, and that elastic will hide inside. And then we can just take it to the sewing machine and just sew that edge shut. So just put it back in the sewing machine again. You'll be able to see where you started and stopped. And you're trying not to sew over your elastic at this stage. You're just trying to sew that channel shut. And you can snip your threads off. And that overstitching is just then hidden right at the back, isn't it, where Pere's coat will cover it. So then his straps do cross over, and the next thing we're going to do then is we're going to sew the straps, the press studs onto the straps, and have those at the front just there. So that's the way that we're going to do it. So let me get my needle and my thread and my press studs out of my kit again, and we'll be ready to start and do those. So we've all got our dungarees all ready now, just to put our press studs on, which are these little bits just here that are in the kit. So we're going to just take his feet and pop them on, just so that we can just adjust for size. It's going to look really cute in these, I think. Does Santa Claus look cute? Handsome, maybe. Really handsome in these. So let's put those on, and let's pop his little tail through so that we've got that in the right place. Just ease your fabric around the outside of that without pulling it off. We can just pull his trousers down a little bit. They're a little bit longer than Florin's, aren't they? So he's got nice little bloomers, hasn't he? And then we're going to cross the straps over at the back, just like that, and then bring them over to the front and just see where those straps need to be. And I think they just need to be right on the end for mine. It'll depend on how much you stuff your character and that type of thing as to whether they need slightly less length on the straps or not. But I think just on the edge there will just be about perfect for me. So what I'm going to do now is I'll take them off him, because it'll be easier, won't it, to sew quickly. And I'm sure you've seen press studs. Sit there, just there, Pere, for a minute. Seen press studs sewn on, but I've got a knot on the end of my thread. And I'm going to sew the thicker bits on the back of the bib. So I'm just going to get one of them off now. Just make sure you don't get disturbed or little children or little pets around while you're doing this, because obviously they can pick them up, can't they? Let's just tuck the straps inside at the moment, otherwise they're going to get in the way. And then I'm going to just take a stitch away from the edge of the press stud position, but only through one side of the bib, because then that will give me an ability to bury my thread. So if I've got a stitch through like that, but you can't see anything on the inside, so that puts that knot out of the way. Just put my glasses down so I can see, and then I'm using the largest part of the press stud. That's the word I wanted, and I've just threaded that on. So once we've got it threaded on, then we can start to position it. Now your challenge is trying to sew this on without going through the edge of to the other side of the bib. So just take your time with this, but you only need about 2 or 3, because I don't think that actually I'm going to undress mine. And if you wanted to sew the strap straight to the back of the bib, you could do, because I don't know about you, but mine aren't necessarily going to get undressed. So there's one lot, and then I just travel in between the 2 pieces of fabric again to get to the next position where the press stud needs to be sewn on. Now that we've got that started, I can now lift my thread or my knot, put a little bit of pressure on it and pull it, and then that knot's off, but it's got a nice long tail that's hidden in the side of the fabric. And then you then take another stitch in your new position, but again you're just trying to be careful not just to catch that top layer of fabric. You don't want to be going all the way through. You don't want to go through both sides of the bib, because you're trying to keep it nice and neat on the top side of the bib. So just take your time, and I'm just doing 3 stitches through each, and then travel along again. So I'm just going to sew both of them on the same way, and I'll do the same thing with once I've done a couple of stitches in each position for holding these pieces of press stud on. then I will travel back through inside the 2 layers of the bib just to hide the end so it doesn't poke out on another day. And then I'll sew the other one on the same way, and then I'll show you how I do pretty much the same thing with the straps. But with the straps you can go through to both sides, because you don't need to worry then about it being seen on the front, because the back of the strap won't be seen at all. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So we've done quite well with these. These have been much quicker than the last ones, and much easier and straightforward. And it, as I said earlier, it does just show you how once you've made something once, because we made, you know, pretty much the same thing without the pleat for florin earlier. So we already knew what we were doing with that one. Just a couple of stitches backwards and forwards, and that will just, oops, just set that give us a bit of a tail to work with. And then through between both sets of, oh, gone through, you see. So you just check on the back before you give it a long tail, that's it. And then just pull it through. And then when we snip that off, that'll pull back inside. So there's one sewn on, fairly neatly. I'll go and sew the other one on, and then I'll come back to the others. But as I say, yes, when you've made a pattern once, so I know that when we talk about making a toile when we're dressmaking, then, you know, really that's just a practice garment, just to have a go at making it and to see how it all works and how it all gets put together. But then I know it seems like an extra step when you're dressmaking, but once you've, I'm talking about dressmaking because I have dressmaking videos on my channel as well. Then when you actually come to sew your final garment, because you've already sewn it once, you'll find that you'll save some of that time that you saved making the toile, because you've already then made your, you know, made that garment once, so you already know what the next steps are and how to make those. So yeah, let me just carry on with these, and then I will come back to you. Okay, so that's those two sewn on the back there. So now all you've got to do is make sure that when you fold your strap over, you've not got any twists in it, and then you kind of mark where you want, which side you want your press stud to be on, and I would just put a pin in on both of them just so that you get the right side. So that then reminds you. So that's that one and that's that one. That just marks it so I know which side, and it is the same side, the right side of the straps, but they can get twisted, you see. So with these now, what we can do with our thread is we can thread in the end of our dungarees, straps, we can just thread that in, and that knot will pull in straight inside. So now I know which side I'm working on, I can take my strap off. Then I thread my needle through the end of the press stud without positioning it, because I don't position it until I've got it anchored down. Otherwise, as you could see today, everything's getting pinged all over the place. And then because we don't need to worry so much about the straps on these being seen on both sides, it's just got caught on my pin. I just took that one back down inside my dungarees, just keep it out of my way. Then we can hold it with our fingernail, and we can then just take the three stitches through the holes on each one. And that should be enough, because like I say, I don't think these clothes are going to get taken on and off very often. If you've got grandchildren around and you know that they're going to keep taking these on and off, then you might want to put a few more stitches on just to be a bit more secure with yours. Yeah, I'm just going through the holes, and I'm just going to do three or four stitches for mine on each one. And then I will, when I come to the end, when I've done all of those, then I will just travel my needle down the strap on the inside and cut my thread off, and that will again bury that end for me. And this is just securing the bottom of those straps as well, isn't it, where it was potential for fraying. So I've just gone over the edge there, that's it. And I'll move on to the next one. So I'll just carry on sewing the rest of these on, and I'll get Pere dressed with his new bloomers that he's going to be thrilled with, and then I'll turn the camera around and we'll have a little round up and a little chat, and I'll show you what we've done. But if you are finding value in these videos and they've been useful to you, I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. I love to know that people are there and are saying hello to me and what have you. And if you want to leave a comment, then I'm always happy to read those, and I always answer my comments as well. It might not be the same day, but I will always answer the comments. If anybody takes the time to leave me a message, then I will always take the time to reply. And if you didn't know, I've also got a Facebook page, which is Facebook group, sorry, which is the Sewing by Claire Sewing Support Group. And therefore, if you need any help with any of the Luna Lapin, or you need any help with any of your dressmaking projects or anything else, then you can contact me. And you can post pictures of your makes, and it's not just Luna, it's everything, every kind of stitching and what have you that we like to cover in there. And it's a really friendly and inclusive bunch. Well, you're very welcome to come and join us, and we will welcome you, and you can ask me any questions, and I can show you other projects that I'm working on, and yeah, just have a good time with like-minded people. So I'll put a link onto the screen for you for that, and then if you want to pop along and send. The only thing to say is you must answer the membership questions, because that's how I keep scammers out. So it does say a couple of questions. One is about what areas of dressmaking, what areas of sewing are you interested in. So just pop down what you're interested in, because that helps me guide the content for the channel. It asks where you heard about me, whether it was through word of mouth or you've been recommended by somebody else or through the YouTube channel. And most people come through the YouTube channel. Then it just asks you to agree to the group rules, which is all the normal ones, which is things like no bullying, no spamming, and just being courteous to each other. So it's not it's nothing onerous at all, but you must answer those questions, otherwise I will decline it. But I'll try and decline it and then ask you to just answer those questions, and then as I say, I'll then be happy to admit you, and you can join in some of our fun. There's about 100 people over there as of today's date, which is July 2023. So yeah, it's not one of those groups where somebody's posting every 2 minutes, so don't worry about getting it inundated. It's one of those groups where people tend to post something if they've got something to say. So you've got a project to share, or you want help with something, then it's that type of group. So perhaps there's less than one post a day, I think, really. But we do get quite enthusiastic about each other's makes, which is always nice, isn't it? Yeah, and it'd be very nice to have you along. So let me just finish off sewing this. I'm nearly done, and as I say, I'll turn the camera around and we'll get Pere dressed, and we're all done. And so there we go, here's Pere in his lovely ribbon trimmed and pleated trousers. He's got his bib looking all nice and smart. If I turn him round, we've got the crossover straps, we've got his little tail poking out, and they're looking all lovely. So I think he's quite pleased with those. Nice to be dressed now after being so naked, and he's been so patient, hasn't he, while we got Mary and we got Florin dressed as well. So that concludes everything for his bloomers. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's a bit of a quicker video, as I said, but if you need any more detail or something that wasn't quite clear, always have a look on Florin, because the basic bloomers are the same apart from the pleats and the ribbon. Yeah, Florin hasn't got a ribbon on his, so all of the bib attachment and the straps is all the same. So I did go into a bit more detail on that one, which is why I've been a bit quicker with this one for you, because I didn't want to bore anybody. So here we go with Pere. I'm on to his jacket next, his lovely boucle jacket, and that'll be the next video that I do, and then we'll be doing his hat and his boots, so that they're all covered for you as well. But for now, I think he's looking really smart in those. I'm really pleased, and so is Pere. So take care everybody, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.